sometimes we're asked to do things that we just are not ready for. But Barnabas was the kind of person that when you fall down, he would pick you back up and say, help dust you off and say, hey, let's get back in the game. Well, Paul had a disagreement with Barnabas, and it was so sharp that they separated. John Mark and Barnabas went one way, and Paul hooked up with Silas, and they went another way, and they went on about their business. Now, if that was the end of the story, you might conclude that the Bible thinks it's okay that when you have conflict, you go your separate ways. But as a great broadcaster used to say, and now the rest of the story. You see, the thing that John and Barnabas and Paul and Silas and many of these gospel writers and heroes had in common is they began to understand and live out the love that Jesus was talking about, that Jesus poured into them, that Jesus shared with them. Remember, Jesus says, a new command I give you, to love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. This is more than a mere suggestion. This is a command. It's very important, first of all, because God is love. But we need to understand that love is the glue that binds us to one another. It's the glue that allows us to forgive one another. It's a glue that allows us to restore relationship with one another, even in the midst of conflict. The church is not immune to conflict. But one of the things that the church should be good at is resolving conflict. And here in this story of the conflict between Paul and Barnabas, we begin to see that, yes, these are great men of God that can have conflict. But the Bible teaches us that they resolve their conflict. We need to talk about what it means to be friend. You know, Jesus talked about foundations. He talked about building a house, the difference between building a house on sand or on a solid foundation. He talked about that when the winds and the rains came, the house built on sand, the stuff that it was built upon would subside. It would give away. And if your foundation gives away, then whatever's built upon it will not stand. However, if you build your house on a solid foundation, then the winds and the rain, which are really the trials and the tests of life, they may come and beat against it, but the structure that's built on a solid foundation has a better chance to withstand those trials of life. And so we must distinguish between what the world knows as friendship and what the church understands as friendship. You know, Jesus said to his disciples at one point, I no longer call you servants or disciples, I call you friends. Because a servant doesn't know his master's business. And so we're friends. And because we're friends, I'm pouring into you the business, my business, which is ultimately the Father's business. And so when somebody is ready because of conflict to unfriend, to cut you out on social media or social reality, the big question is we friends? Were we ever friends? Did we have the kind of love that weathers the storms of proximity or lack of proximity? Are we willing to sacrifice for one another? Are we willing to forgive one another? Are we willing to understand that as we are physically family, the church is spiritually family? We must learn the lessons of true friendship that means that even in the midst of conflict, there is a love that provides the glue that will lead to conflict resolution. And why is that so important? It's so important because the church has the mission to go into the world and show them how to resolve the greatest conflict that ever befell man, the conflict between God and man, the conflict between heaven and earth. We must be able to show the world how to resolve that conflict in the only way that matters. That is through God. That is through Jesus. That is through real love. The writer of Proverbs says, or this proverb says, hatred stirs up conflict, but love covers all wrongs. 1 Peter 4:8, above all, love each other deeply, because love covers a multitude of sins. We are going to have conflict, folks. That is just a matter of folks dealing with one another. Just as Aunt Jerry and my mother, who were very strong-willed individuals, had different opinions about things, but because they truly loved one another, and more importantly, because they truly had the love of God, even in the midst of conflict, they found a way to resolve the conflict. Much quicker probably than Paul and Silas, because as I said, most often when they'd have their knockdown, drag-out arguments, the very next day, they were laughing and enjoying each other's company like the argument never happened in the first place. How do I know? What does the Word of God say about the conflict between Paul and Barnabas and Paul and John Mark? Well, in wrapping up his second letter to his spiritual son, Paul writes to Timothy in 2 Timothy, do your best to come to me quickly, for Demas, because he loved the world, has deserted me and has gone to Thessalonica. Crescens has gone to Galatia, and Titus to Dalmatia. Only Luke is with me. Now here's this. Get Mark and bring him with you, because he is helpful to me in my ministry. It seems even after their conflict that Paul and Mark had a reconciliation. And see, that's what a foundation of love will do. My friends, don't be imitators of the world, who are so ready to unfriend over the silliest things. Probably we're not friends in the first place. I doubt that any of us have over 1,000 friends. I don't care what your status on Facebook is. But don't imitate that. Imitate Christ, Paul says. Imitate the attitude that is willing to forgive and resolve conflict. Imitate the attitude that understands that we must learn how to do that, because our job is to show the world how to resolve their conflict, their eternal conflict, and to point them to Christ, the great mediator, whose love opened the way for our conflict resolution. And he stands ever ready to help the world, anyone, with their conflict, and to help them resolve it. That's the message for today, folks. As you're in close quarter with your family, and sometimes they can get on your nerve, but always remember that foundation of love, that love that can cover a multitude of sins. Be willing to forgive and reconcile, because we have work to do. We as the Church of God have work to do. And we can only do that if love is the overarching and overriding thing. We can only do that work if we truly love one another to the point where we forgive one another and resolve our conflicts. God bless you. Thank you for tuning in for these few words. And remember, I love you, and there ain't nothing you can do about it. Bad English, but good Bible. God bless you. GoPro, stop recording. GoPro, stop recording.